Look, I'm going to have to talk to you about, one word, which is Trump, because although I pretty much agree with everything that Stephen said this morning about the importance of an industrial strategy, about the significance of a government here that is trying to drive growth, but some would say has some contradictory policies, whether it comes to sort of regulation and tax on the one side versus some of the plans that they've had in terms of very broad-based industrial strategy on the other, and some would argue greater stability they introduced to the economy. All of that stuff really matters, but it's not as important as the remaking of the global system that has delivered prosperity for the world and us, that we are seeing take place. And these are, I choose my words lightly, these are shocking times. I was in the US yesterday, went with the Prime Minister for his historic first meeting with the American president, not first meeting with Trump, but first meeting since Trump became president. Some of you may have seen, I said to Trump, I asked Trump in the East Room of the White House, would he apologize to Zelensky for calling him a dictator and for praising Vladimir Putin, who is a dictator, and that hasn't gone terribly well, has it, truthfully. And the announcement overnight that they are ceasing military aid to Ukraine is shocking. I choose my words carefully. Since the Second World War, Europe and America have stood together in the face of threats of the sort posed by Putin. That has broken down. Now, before I get into the detail of where we go, I think it is just important to stand back for a second and look at what is being dismantled. Since the Second World War, we have essentially, the Western world, led by America, has basically operated on the basis, not immediately, some of these things happened over time, but broadly on the basis of two principles. One is there were international laws and norms that we would abide by. And so when you see an illegal invasion of the sort that Putin has carried out, the West would stand together in opposition to that and would not surrender in the face of, both the atrocities that he has committed, Putin within Ukraine, but just a total breach of all international norms. The American president wants to do a tawdry deal with Putin, which will involve surrendering land, and there is a big question mark over whether or not Ukraine will be able to continue as a viable independent state, or whether it will become another vassal state like Belarus. So there are these enormous issues at stake. Second principle that has governed us, and this has been more the sort of last 30-odd years, is that free trade is good for all of us. Now, you will probably be aware that overnight Trump has imposed 25% tariffs on his two closest and most important trading partners, Canada and Mexico. And he has confirmed the doubling of the tariff on the world's second largest economy, China. The economic impacts of this are not complicated, except apparently for the man who's in the White House. The economic impacts are when you put up the cost of goods being sold into the US, there are only two things that can possibly happen. Either the importer absorbs the hit, there's a massive squeeze in their profits, and therefore you have to assume their ability to invest and their confidence, or they simply pass it on to consumers. And, you know, both of those have negative impacts. Growth slows down, inflation rises. And, you know, none of this is, you know, you don't actually have to have a degree in economics to get this, right? This was, you know, when I was in this same press conference, somebody actually put all this to Trump, and he just said it's a load of old rubbish. And, you know, so we are heading in this world of mercantilism, protectionism. We will see retaliation. Canada and Mexico are both talking about putting in place retaliatory tariffs. We don't yet know what kind of tariffs he will impose on the European Union. But he has said, again last week, he said his view of the European Union is it was deliberately set up to do damage to America. That is his view, right? So I think it is pretty close to inconceivable now we won't see significant tariffs imposed on the EU. That said, I have to say, you know, I was there, I was observing it at close range. His relationship with our Prime Minister was remarkably friendly, remarkably positive, right? He talked about doing trade deals with us. Peter Mandelson, our ambassador in Washington, has come up with this proposal for a very comprehensive technology partnership between the UK and the US, which would see both collaboration between our high-tech companies and also collaboration between our research institutions. I have to say, nothing else was going on in the world. I would regard this as as a very positive initiative, and indeed, Trump said that he liked the look of it. And he also raised the prospect not of a comprehensive free trade agreement with the UK, but of sectoral trade deals. Now, somebody who's lived and breathed this now since, well, you know, been in this world forever, but, you know, was immersed in the first Trump term. You'll remember that back in the first Trump term, 2016 onwards, he kept saying he wanted, you know, the best ever trade deal with the UK. It never happened, right? So I think you've got to take with a pinch of salt anything he says about actually doing these trade deals. But I did take away from it the likelihood, maybe that's too strong, but the possibility at least, that if he imposes swingeing tariffs on the EU, there may be some kind of a carve-out for the UK. And there's no question. I mean, you know, he likes the UK, and he absolutely loves the royal family. I mean, you know, you should have seen his face when Starmer hands over this letter from the King. There was this slightly weird thing, actually, which my neighbour said to me is, you know, can he actually read? Because he did, because he was slightly struck. Anyway, he passed it to Starmer, who then read it out to him. You know, anyway. But, you know, he definitely, you know, this honour that we are proposing to him, that he will be the first ever American president to have 2 state visits to the UK, he loves that, right? I mean, he just loves being special. So on the narrow issue of whether or not we get this carve-out, there's a pretty good prospect. But in terms of what really matters to the UK, which is global growth, which is slowing down a result of pretty much everything that Trump is doing, and global inflation, which will, have an impact on these shores. Everything that Trump is doing at the moment is bad for us. I don't know if any of you saw the nowcast by the Atlanta branch of the Federal Reserve, right? And it is taken seriously as a measure of what's happening to the US economy. Just a few weeks ago, the Atlanta Fed's nowcast said 3% annualized growth in the first quarter, right? It is now saying minus 3%, right? That's a significant slump, a 6% swing. And, if America is slowing down, the world will be slowing down. So, this is a moment, where it's not the end of the world, but we are facing serious headwinds. Where do we go, though, in the immediate thing? Because, security, it's not just about how we feel. It also has an impact on how we're able to conduct both our personal and our business lives. So where next for Ukraine absolutely categorically matters. Now, we had, as I say, this shocking announcement overnight about cutting off aid. Trump says it's because he doesn't think Zelensky is taking the idea of peace seriously enough. I mean, one has to put to one side the emotion one feels where, you see an American president absolutely explicitly taking the side of the aggressor, Putin, right? I mean, and actually one of the things I slightly admire the Prime Minister, that he is not allowing what I'm sure is his natural horror about all of this to, in any sense, have an impact on his public demeanour. And I have to say, for what it's worth, I do think this has been, by a wide margin, the Prime Minister's best week since becoming Prime Minister, because he is focused on what you would want a British Prime Minister to be focused on, which is how do you limit, the very serious risks that we face. So having spoken to people in government before coming here today, they are essentially sticking to the plan that they agreed with European leaders at Lancaster House on Sunday. And again, let's sort of try and accentuate some of the more positive things. Before I get on to what that plan is, let's just try and accentuate some of the more positive things that have been happening. So it was a good event, right? We saw, there was this one weird glitch. God knows how this happened, but they forgot to invite the leaders of the Baltic states. Fucking mad, actually, truthfully. These are the states that, frankly, feel they have most to lose from Putin feeling empowered. But, he made up for it. He spoke to them on Zoom. But apart from that glitch, okay, we haven't seen since Brexit, right? We haven't seen a British Prime Minister convene a meeting of European leaders plus Trudeau, at which it's quite clear that Britain's role in this is respected. We weren't marginalised. We were absolutely in the thick of a European initiative to be a serious counterweight to Trump. And this will have, I hope, positive ramifications for other things that we need, and in particular a better set of trading arrangements with the EU. It may not be growing particularly fast, but it is still, an enormously important single market. And there's just a sort of chink of hope that if we can continue to pull together on the military issue, that actually the European Union's leaders will at some point recognise that bringing the UK back into the European family in a commercial as well as a military and foreign policy sense, that we may see them just being a bit more flexible around the red lines that have been very frustrating since 2016, which is, in the end, if you want the single market, you've got to have free movement of people, and if you want customs union, you can't do your own trade deal. So we just got to hope that in the mix of all of this, there is room, and I think that's reasonable as a hope, that this may allow us over time, once we get through this current rather more acute crisis, to engage in more constructive dialogue, which leads to, we hope, greater integration again of our market with theirs. Another aspect of all of this, Stephen talked about the importance of industrial policy. I don't think there are any Labour ministers in the room. I mean, I have to say, I'm not persuaded it's desperately coherent at the moment what they're doing. They've got, I think it's 8 different strands of work. As one very senior business person who's involved in all of this said to me, what they've got is a sort of soundbite, an idea, but at the moment, not a lot of very coherent policies to implement. The one slight exception, actually, which has sort of happened by accident, is actually in the defence space. And, I mean, if you happen, and this is sort of one of those things that is very painful for ordinary citizens to hear, but if you happen to be in the defence industry, Christmas has come early. I mean, this is and it's not just UK spending, which is obviously rising from 2.3 to 2.5, and I suspect we'll get to 3 rather sooner than the government is prepared to say at the moment because of their worries about these completely batty fiscal rules that they've got. And there is a sort of, funny, it was the first time that I heard Starmer again talk about issues with a sort of economic industrial aspect to it in the last few days, where I felt this was more compelling. And it's partly more compelling because we can all see that we do need to rearm. Awful thing to say. I mean, if you'd asked me 10 years ago that I'd be standing here and talking about, the imperative of European rearmament, I wouldn't have questioned your sanity, but I would really desperately hoped, this wasn't going to happen. But there is literally no option now. And of course, the thing about defence, and we've seen this through the history of technological innovation, when you invest in defence, there are massive spin-offs, right? For other industries, civilian industries, technology. So, weirdly, I think they've sort of got an opportunity around rearmament to come up with something that looks to all of us like a genuinely coherent and compelling industrial plan. So let's just focus, though, now for a minute or two on where we are vis-à-vis Ukraine. On the news last night, what I disclosed is that the immediate priority for Starmer is to work with Macron in France and, of course, Zelensky and Mark Rutte, who's the Secretary General of NATO, to come up with an ceasefire framework, not a peace deal. Peace deal is, where you get to when you actually sort of define the borders and work out what the backstop arrangements for the rest of it. This is literally a sort of short-term cessation of hostilities that would allow peace negotiations to take place. Now, there's been a bit of uncertainty about how broad that ceasefire would be. The French, Macron, briefed 2 nights ago that it would be just sea and air where there would be a ceasefire. The British, I think, take the view, given that in the end, none of this is going to happen unless Trump underwrites it, the British view is that actually we need to get to a proposal that is a full ceasefire. The view, as I say, from those close to Starmer this morning is actually what happened overnight with Trump suspending military support for Ukraine simply accelerates the urgency of coming up with a ceasefire deal, or ceasefire proposal, not deal, proposal. And so I think we may get that Thursday or Friday. That will then go to Trump. Trump will then decide on the basis of that proposal whether he has changed whether he's going to change his mind, and whether he will take the view that Zelensky is now, in his view, serious about peace. And therefore, the benign outcome would be he will use that then to go to Putin, and at that point, serious negotiations on a settlement, a peace, start to take place. That ceasefire is not the moment when British soldiers would go to Ukraine to maintain stability, right? British soldiers, what Starmer has said is British soldiers would only be, it's still momentous, right? It should be under no illusion. The idea that British soldiers are going to be defending a border against Putin, again, this is a big moment in our history. But that would only happen if we get to the point where Ukraine and Russia have agreed a sustainable peace. And if I'm honest with you, right now, I cannot put a probability on that outcome. What I can tell you is that Starmer is not wrong to want to bring America on board on all of this, because we have, as a continent, underinvested in our military and underinvested in our defense industries now for decades, and we are still dependent on US support. We are very rich nations. We have got resources, but as and when a peace deal is, as and when a peace deal is agreed, if it's ever agreed, we don't have adequate air power. We certainly need the cooperation of American intelligence, and there is certain technology, particularly when it comes to long-range missiles, that we don't have and that we are dependent on American permissions for. So, the idea that we can go it alone to defend Ukraine, as Europe, I don't mean the UK, I mean as Europe, is, I think, a bit naive. It's probably time in a minute or two to talk to Steph and talk to all of you about other things. And we don't have to talk about this. We can talk about other aspects of government policy if you want when we come to the questions section. The one thing that I have been sort of clutching as a straw in all of this, which I still clutch, I'm still clinging to, is what many people would say is Trump's gangsterish attempt to take control of Ukraine's precious rare earth reserves, mineral reserves, energy reserves. And we should be under no illusion. We do appear to be moving into this era of global gangsterism. I talked about the collapse of free trade and the rules-based order. If you want to understand, there are lots of contradictions in the way that, in what Trump says and does. In fact, he can say two completely contradictory things in the space of an hour. But what is absolutely manifest in everything he says and does is that he believes he's a great man who should have the right to, say and do anything on behalf of America. And he sees himself broadly as carving up the world with, the Asian gangster Xi and the sort of, Russian gangster Putin, right? And that, I think, is, as I say, the sort of framework that we now have to understand. Now, part of that is he wants property rights over hundreds of billions of dollars of Ukraine's assets. Again, many of us may think this is appalling, but the positive side of that is if, as and when that deal is signed, and Ukraine is indicating it will sign it, at that point, America then has a very, very material interest in keeping Ukraine out of Putin's clutches. And therefore, you would hope that that would provide America with the commercial incentive, even if, they don't any longer believe that, that laws and free trade make us richer. He does understand that these particular resources will make America richer, and maybe at that point he will deploy American resources to protecting Ukraine. So I've cheered you all up, but I sort of feel it's important that you should know this stuff. Now, where are we going to move on to, Steph?
Thanks, Robert. I'm so glad you clarified in that it's not the end of the world, so thanks. No, I think, you've made loads of interesting points about the geopolitics and things. One of the other things we talk a lot about is AI, and this is going to be various sessions on this later on here. I wanted to ask you guys a question on this, because Robert and I often talk about AI being the next industrial revolution, and I want to know whether you think that as well. So first of all, can you put your hands up if you use AI in your business now? Right, so it could be anything, whether that's like ChatGPT to get you to write an email for you to fire someone, or maybe you've got, or maybe you're using it within the kind of robotics or whatever else you've got in your systems. And can you put your hands up? So that was about half, do you reckon then? It was about half. And can you put your hands up if you think, as Robert does, that AI is the next industrial revolution? That's more than the people who are using it now, which is really interesting, because this is something we talk about a lot, isn't it? Despite all the shit, for want of a better phrase, going on in the world at the minute, this could all change pretty quickly with AI.
Yeah, I mean, look, just I have been, you might have thought a little bit Eeyore-ish, to use Steph's phrase. Trying to park Trump to one side for a second, I'm just a great evangelist for AI. I think that, in a UK that has not grown anything like the rate we need to generate the taxation to, resource our public services in the way they need resourcing for 15, 16 years, 1% growth since 2007-8 versus, almost 3% in the previous 20 years. And our productivity, as you know, absolutely lamentable, flatlining for years. AI does offer the opportunity to massively increase output per person, output per hour worked. And one of the things that I would like to see when he has time out from the Ukraine-Trump crisis, the government doing, and this was missing. The one thing that was significantly missing from what I thought was, in the round, a pretty good AI package that they announced a few weeks ago, is what we need is a massive program for AI adoption, AI diffusion throughout industry, big and small. Because there is a global race here. There is obviously a global race when it comes to developing AI services. And I think, although we are not in the large language space, and frankly, that ship has sailed, we are not going to be producing giants to rival, the Chat GPTs and the Claudes and the DeepSeeks. Nonetheless, in terms of applications, we are massively still in the race. We have something like 750 companies in what you might call the higher technology area, backed by venture, with $25 million of annual revenue, so not trivial. And we've got more of these than any other European country by a margin. One of the things Stephen talked about, which I completely agree with, and again is slightly at the moment missing from government policy, is we don't have the scale-up infrastructure here. One of the, I almost regard it as scandals, is the number of really great high-tech companies that go to America when they really want to become world leaders. And obviously we're talking about DeepMind, probably currently worth about $200 billion, that was sold for several hundred million to Google. So, again, think of all that value that has been lost to the UK. ARM worth, 5-6 times what it was sold to SoftBank, now listed on the New York Stock Exchange. This is all value that should be accruing and wealth that should be accruing in the UK. We need to create an infrastructure that allows these businesses to become global leaders as British businesses, not as emigre American businesses. But as I say, the other thing is simply that we need this rollout throughout the economy. And we also need welfare systems that support the jobs disruption, which there will be. We need a massive ramp up in both, providing financial support to people who lose their jobs as they retrain, and we need the facilities to allow them to retrain for this new world. And we need to change what we teach in schools. Because again, we're nowhere near having a curriculum that is fit for this new world. But there is a massive opportunity, and I have to say, I think the government sort of gets it. I just don't think they've quite got the building blocks in place.
Yeah, because I think skills is my biggest beef, and we often talk about this because I started out, as a lot of you know, in the manufacturing sector. And that was because the school I went to was a school that was sponsored by industry. So it was a city technology college. And little did I know at the time, though, that our main sponsor was British American Tobacco, which explained why they were quite lax about smoking in the loos. But it was really interesting because we were a melting pot of kids from a real, it's Middlesbrough, so and it still is in many ways, very deprived area, a mix of kids who, many of them didn't have the structure in their lives to be able to do well in exams, but they were really resilient kids. They were really entrepreneurial because they had to be in order to survive. It was like the local drug dealers' kids in there, the local hitman's kids, that type of thing. I can talk about him now because hitman's dead. But my point being is, a lot of these kids went on to do really well in the engineering sector because our school had this direct link with engineering and with taking us out into a supply chain. I knew what a supply chain was when I was 13, and that made a huge difference. But that seems to have just disappeared, that whole sense of building young people for the world of work and for the jobs we actually need and getting them excited about sectors that they could be part of. This is why things like the National Manufacturing Day is really important, to open your doors and let people see it. But similar to what Robert's saying here, you're also getting this massive cohort now of people coming out of jobs where they feel useless because they feel like their skills aren't transferable. I was talking to someone yesterday who's a graphic designer who's just lost his job because he's been replaced by AI. And he's lost. He's like, I don't know what to do. And there's a kind of a resource of people, a big pool of people who are ready to be taken into the sectors we need them. A hairdresser I know who, for whatever reason, because the hairdressing business wasn't going well, ended up working for Hitachi, and because she was so dexterous with her hands, she was really good at doing all the wiring in the trains up in the north. And so there's like, but she was helped because she knew someone else who worked at Hitachi. There's a whole raft of people who are going to come out of jobs now, replaced by AI, who will just not know where to go. So I think the kind of lifelong learning side of this, and wouldn't it be great if you just had somewhere to go, or somewhere, or an app or whatever that just helped you navigate what type of skills you have and what type of jobs are out there, like a kind of, I guess like a careers advisor. We all had shit careers advice at school pretty much. But that type of thing, I think the government aren't thinking enough about, is how do we not lose these people who, end up, various people who end up with mental health problems because they feel worthless, or, end up in benefits because they haven't got any income anymore, but yet have all these amazing skills that you lot would be crying out for. Like, can you put your hand up if you're a business that is still struggling, or struggling now to get the skills you need? Like, are you able, so put your hand up if skills is still a big beef for you. So it's probably, again, about maybe a third of people, which is, and yet we could probably have a third of people who put their hand up and say, I really want to look for another job, and your sector could be the one that's in. So for me, I still feel like we hear about evolution in education, and I think we need revolution, and we actually need to just think again about how do we allow young people at various stages in their lives to know what jobs are out there and what skills are needed. And you don't have to be siloed into, oh, you're good at maths or you're not good at maths. It needs to be tangible and practical. And then you'll realise, like, one of my mates who was the hitman's son, has got a very successful manufacturing business in Singapore. And no one ever expected that when the police used to raid our school and take his Rolex off him because it had been on Crime Stoppers the night before. So, and so it's harnessing that. And I think we're not very good in this country at that, are we?
Completely agree with that.
Should we take some questions now from people as well? Does anybody, you can ask about absolutely anything. So, yeah, we'll just get some mics over to you. So there's one there, and then, yeah, brilliant.
Hi, sorry, just want to ask a question about industrial strategy.
Yeah.
And it's informed, I'm currently reading Ian Dunt's book, How Westminster Works and Why It Doesn't, which is quite a terrifying book to read. How confident are you that we have the level of expertise within government / Whitehall to prepare a fit-for-purpose industrial strategy?
Yeah, we talk about this a lot, don't we, about the lack of skills in...
So I think there are two sort of different important points about this. One of the things that has been disappointing about this government is that they weren't prepared for government. They just didn't do enough detailed work in opposition on the things that really matter, and in particular on policies that would lead to the kind of productivity increases that will get us out of this low growth trap that is also fracturing our politics. Because, it's not just, sort of altruism that you want, your citizens to be better off. It's also that, our way of life is threatened, as and when people lose confidence in democracy. And actually, opinion polls show quite a lot of young people don't have the confidence they had in don't have the confidence in democracy that, our generation had at a comparable age. So this stuff really, really matters. I'm afraid to say that I don't think, I'm always slightly worried that I'm going to go into old fart mode, because I've been in and around this space, Westminster business, for decades. But I'm afraid to say, and therefore I'm tried to sort of screen out the natural temptation that we all have of thinking people were brainier and better and, you know, taller or whatever in the old days. Truthfully, you know, if I look around our politicians, if I look around Whitehall, there are still decent, good, creative people, but nowhere near enough of them. That the quality of entry into public services has declined, and for good reasons. I mean, you know, we sort of as a nation both denigrated public service very explicitly through a lot of the media for a long time, which I think has done the whole nation a disservice, and equally, you know, for all the definite industrial benefits of the Thatcher era, the focus on the only thing that matters is your wedge at the end of the day permeated people's decisions about where they wanted to work and when you could earn, you know, hundreds of thousands in the city, in digital, at the age of 23, 24. Why would you go into public service? So, you know, the quality of people going in has deteriorated. I have to say, though, on the positive side, although on the Labour benches there are, as you would expect, you know, some not desperately impressive new MPs, there are a remarkable number of really bright young Labour MPs, way better than I expected, if I'm honest, in terms of breadth of experience, talent, commitment. So it's not all bad news. But somehow we have to raise the status of public service, because one of the reasons why this government is struggling to put together some coherent policies is because of the dearth of brains. And this is across, but there's a slightly separate issue which I could bang on about for ages, and I'm going to try and capture in a couple of sentences. If you go back to the Thatcher era, if you go back to the Blair-Brown era, not only were those as individuals, you know, pretty impressive in terms of their brain power, but they were also surrounded by really impressive advisors, colleagues, and you know, one of the things that is missing is actually intellectual leadership. We don't, you know, when we were growing up, there were thought leaders who were, again, towering people within society. They don't exist anymore. And we've sort of descended into a sort of managerial approach, which for some of the big challenges we face is inadequate.
Isn't that because of the scrutiny everyone now gets? Like, you can't do anything without you kind of anything you've ever done in your life being put in the press or on social media or whatever. It's like, who would want to put themselves up for that?
Social media is, you know, I have to say, in many, many ways, an absolute blight on our society in so many ways, whether it's the sort of problems it's causing, you know, the epidemic of mental ill health among younger people, for example. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's very, very, if you think about the abuse that somebody who becomes an MP gets on social media, if you think about, you know, their lives are threatened. They have to have police protection, many of them, all the time. It's very hard to choose that life. And to an extent, therefore, I think this is about us as a society looking in on ourselves and just trying to, you know, we need a national debate about this, where we just need to look at ourselves and say, what the hell have we become? That this is, you know, that we're treating these people who, you know, we rely on in this way.
The other thing I'd say as well, when you know, the Labour first came in, though, we were talking about how they did get some good people in some positions, like James Timpson, who obviously knows a lot about reforming offenders, and him coming in to be prisons minister. So there were some appointments where we were like, oh, you're getting genuine expertise from the...
Sure, it's not that there's no creativity and no thought given to this, but as a, you know, but you know, there's not enough of these people, and there isn't enough yet. As I say, I am slightly hopeful that the rearmament project can actually turn into a genuine economic industrial policy, right? I think it has the potential to do that, but it is still early days.
Would you ever be a politician?
I think it's a sort of sign of how desperate we are. You're even asking the question.
Did you want to ask a question, Lord Harrington? Yeah. Yes, and then are there any other questions as well? Is there any women who want to ask questions too?
Please.
Thank you. I've been waiting all these years to get my revenge on Robert, but
good.
I'm not going to do it today.
No, honestly, I'm here. Do.
Well, I think you're one of the reasons why people don't want to go into politics, actually. Not you as an individual, but no, the way that people political journalists, despite doing a lot of good in the world, basically do well by getting hold of people's scalps. In the same way that business people make money, in the same way that footballers score goals. It's not a criticism, it just goes with the job. But that isn't what I wanted to say. On the subject of AI, I mean, I wish I shared your optimism. Right. But this year, the UK, if you include public investment, government investment in AI and the private sector, it's about 50 billion. Meta alone, one company, are more than that, and not one penny of it's in the UK. And I think we have to put that into perspective. But the second point about the calibre of people going into politics, notwithstanding what I said before, you're not really the main reason. People try it. I wish James Timpson people luck. My friend Poppy Gustafson's been brought into it. But you suddenly realise, in a democracy, that you can't hire or fire anybody. You can't choose who works for you because of the civil service, who are very good. Your policies, which are effectively made by Number 10 and the Treasury, whatever anyone says about any other department, change. They changed several times within one Conservative administration. And when I did the review on foreign direct investment, one of the reasons for not investing in the UK was lack of consistency of policy. I'd like to ask you, Robert, if you think that that's changed in any way with the new government.
Sorry, whether they're likely to be more consistent?
Yeah, well, it's more stable, I guess, isn't it?
I mean, there's quite a lot there. I mean, you and I don't, so just to be absolutely clear, you and I don't disagree that we, in my trade, just to be clear, I want to get back to your so-called personal attack, which I didn't take. I mean, you and I don't disagree that in my trade, we have to make a distinction, which I try to do, between holding power to account, which is, I've always felt for decades is what I do, and that is to make sure that the people who serve us are behaving in an honest and rational way. And, I mean, quite a lot of the so-called scandals that my colleagues are interested in, I've never been that interested in. And one of the things I try and do in my show, to be honest, I mean, one of the things that is depressing is you create a show like mine, which is there to give politicians the space to explain themselves, and then, I'm going to choose my words carefully, they don't fucking explain themselves, right? They just trot out sound bites that have no bearing to what I and the public want to ask them. So politicians are our own own worst enemies. I mean, I've been so explicit in the almost 10 years since my show has been on air, that we are not gotcha television. And yet, the politicians who come on don't have the confidence to talk to all of you as grown-ups, right? So I think there is also an issue about the confidence of the politicians. I also think it's quite, look, obviously, in the sort of data center arms race, right? Stargate is $500 billion, right? The sort of SoftBank, Microsoft, OpenAI joint. You know, we're just not in that world, right? In terms. So you're absolutely right that in terms of the massive AI investments, there is a genuine risk that we're a vassal state. But AI is not just large language models and data centers. It is about applications. We have, in the UK. It's worth reminding ourselves of this. We have 4 of the world's top research universities as measured by league tables in China, Europe, and America. We have absolutely world-class brains. Our problem is not brains, it is translating that into world-class businesses. We're good at small businesses, we need to be good at world, and we are capable of doing that. So I refuse to be pessimistic, actually, about our position in that area. I do think, and you're hearing from the Chancellor later, that... Oh, fuck, are you not supposed to know that? All right, you're not. OK, I don't know where I got that idea from. Oh, it's all right. My desk told me that in a different context. Honestly, I hadn't realised
There's going to be a trapdoor that opens now, and you're just going to disappear
all right.
into it.
ITV was told that. What can I tell you?
Yeah.
I didn't. OK, anyway.
You can neither confirm nor deny.
Right, I'm never being invited back. Anyway, I think she is absolutely obsessed with stability and continuity, right? If I'm honest with you, I actually think a slight problem at the moment for this government is in one particular respect. I slightly, was a bit tendentious in calling the fiscal rules bonkers. But I do think that there is an aspect of our approach to sustaining, borrowing and debt at levels that don't scare the markets. There's one aspect which I wish she would show some more flexibility over, right? We will get a forecast at the end of March from the OBR that says that there's no headroom any longer in terms of the debt rule, that it's gone negative and she's going to have to either put up taxes or cut spending. I personally think to massively readjust your tax and spending policies because of a point-in-time judgment that could easily change in a positive or negative sense in the subsequent six months running up to the budget is nuts, right? I mean, and I think, quite a lot of people, well, it is nuts, right? But that is what we're facing. I don't think she is. I mean, there may be some disguised tax rises, by the way, just so that you know. So I think personal allowances may be frozen for another couple of years, which is these sort of hidden tax rises. But most of it will be delivered via an even tougher spending round. And our public services are creaking, right? I mean, it is possible if we invited Elon Musk over here, that he would be able to, in a matter of time, find amazing amounts of, redundant stuff. And I'm not remotely saying that our public services are as efficient as they should be. The health service is patently nowhere near as productive as it should be. Reorganisation is overdue, right? If you just look at the productivity of the health service before COVID and what it is now, it's shocking how it's declined. Right? So we should be able to do much more with the resources we've got. But equally, and it is amazing, I mean, talked about AI, right, for example. It's sort of amazing. You have a police force. I don't know if any of you have had to have any encounters, so much theft around. I imagine lots of you have had encounters with the police in your the fact that they still write down over 2 hours a bloody statement when they could simply record it and have an AI turn it into text in a matter of minutes. And that, can you think about the amount of police resource that could be freed up if we simply implemented those sorts of systems there? So there's a ton of stuff you can do. But I still think that simply screwing down public services on the basis of one point in time assessment is sort of nuts.
He's got a beef about the police at the minute because he keeps getting his phone nicked, don't you?
Yes, that's happened to me.
Those ones where they drive by and they grab it as they go past on their bike. Just two things I wanted to add to it.
Oh, yeah.
I think the one thing that, and then we should wrap things up, just, you just mentioned there about Musk and obviously all this attempt to get efficiency and the big cuts they're doing. Whether you agree with the morals or not, we don't obviously agree with the morals, but there is a chance that it might work in the sense of it might make them more efficient because they're kind of treating it like a private equity coming in and just asset stripping, getting rid of loads of stuff, taking it back to basics. And there's a danger it might work and then what the implications are here, because other than governments will look at it and go, well, hang on, if America can get away with that and it's done all this, maybe we can do things which are a bit more extreme.
I mean, it's a question of what you think working means. I mean, personally, I take the view that if people are dying in Africa because they can't get vaccinations, because USAID has been closed down. I'm not sure that is most of our definitions of a policy working.
But Americans might not care if their cost of living comes down and they're more prosperous.
So I think we can all acknowledge that we have to be more creative and more radical in terms of how we think about public service delivery. And it is, look, Musk is the most extraordinary sort of business person, leader, sort of civil engineer of our lifetime by a wide margin, right? I mean, it's not just, the money that he's accumulated. It's just that if you think about the range of projects that he has overseen, these are genuine, whether it's Tesla, whether it's SpaceX, whether it's the satellites, whether it's Neuralink, the chip in your brain, whether it's the fact he's now got 3 supercomputers more powerful than any supercomputer in the UK. On every measure, he is extraordinary. And his approach to business, which has paid pretty well, is that with any particular, whether it's a rocket, or whether it's a Tesla, what he says to is the people who do the nuts and bolts is he says, take this thing apart, take out every piece, put it back together again, minus a piece, see if it still works. And, it's a sort of, destroy the thing to make it better and more efficient approach, which has definitely worked for him.
It's lean production.
It is. Sorry?
It's like lean production. That's what
it is. But on a sort of ambitious scale that is really quite remarkable. Now, he is obviously trying to do exactly the same thing with America's public service. He's basically closing everything down, in effect, to work out what it is that the state actually needs, right? And it is it's a bold experiment, and what none of us actually are in a position yet to judge is whether it will lead to extreme social unrest and extreme hardship, or whether actually what will emerge from it is a public sector that is more efficient and better designed. I think there are lessons for us. I'm not remotely saying that we shouldn't be watching incredibly carefully what he's doing over there and thinking actually, so as he's sucking, again, this is probably almost certainly breaching all sorts of people's privacy, but he's sucking all sorts of data out of all their computer systems and then processing them with AI. Part of that is to work out where the waste is. Part of it is to see what can be done by AI rather than people. All of this stuff we should learn from, right? Maybe I'm just too squeamish. I just feel within this country doing it in quite the brutal way that he's doing it, probably wouldn't work, but, who knows?
Yeah. We should probably wrap things up. The thing I just wanted to add is, no matter what's going on politically and geopolitically, I think what we often see in these tough times, is businesses just working their way through it. And actually, for example, the manufacturing sector has been through so much over the decades, and will always, it brings out the entrepreneurial spirit, and streamlining things, you find new ways of doing stuff, and you're really good at that, no matter what the politicians throw at you. You guys are the people who are actually running the economy and making things better, so you shouldn't underestimate your power in all of this, no matter what the politicians are doing. Right, we should let you go, because you've probably got calls. Your phone has been going wild in front of me, so I don't know whether it's the group chat about, well, it could be anything. So I better let you get back to it. Put your hands together for Robert Peston. See you later.